tell us a little bit about your journey from Glasgow and then obviously through these doors here.
Well, I grew up in Glasgow, which happened to be the greatest film-going city in Europe. It had the biggest cinema in Europe, 4,000 seats. It's called the Greens Playhouse. And I used to go along to the Greens Playhouse, and I found myself I would always go to the front row because, like, you know, that's where you get the best value. So I'm seeing the films like this. And I started to turn round and look back at the audience, 4,000 people, and being more fascinated by that than the film. Because what I was seeing was 4,000 people absolutely locked onto the movie, you know? I remember thinking that was a special moment. I had a mother who was very into art cinema, and she would take me, initially reluctantly, to a great little cinema called the Cosmo, now the Glasgow Film Theatre. And I would get to see art movies, mainly Bergman, that kind of stuff, Eisenstein, you know. And I started looking at all this stuff, thinking, how do they do this? How do they actually put stuff on the screen? I remember particularly Rashomon, you know, and being bewitched by it, and thinking, that's what I want to do. So I had a combination of very commercial movies and very arty movies. And I would take my friends, I was a bit of a leader child, and bossy boots, basically. And I would take my friends to the cinema. And the deal was, believe it or not, in Glasgow in those days, you could get in if you had jam jars tied together on a piece of string. You had to wash them and clean them up. And we called them Gisli jars. I mean, you'd take them there, and if you had 6 Gisli jars, you could get one person in. Good scheme, actually. That one person would be me. I'd go in, I'd sit for a couple of minutes in the seat, and then I'd get up and go, as it were, to the toilets, walk past the toilets, open the doors at the back of the cinema, and let all my friends in. So 20 or so friends would come through, and we'd all park ourselves around and watch the films. But the whole point of this was that we then congregated afterwards in the local park, where I started to say, right, you're going to be the German tank commander, you're the Arab chieftain, and I'm the hero, you see? And we'd play, basically reenacting the films that we'd seen. And I also remember trying to explain to my mother, you know, a film that I'd seen, and saying to her, oh, it was fantastic, because you see, this guy, he's doing this and that. Oh, wait a minute, I should have told you that she doesn't know about him because, and I found myself thinking, how the hell can you explain a film? You know, you can't do it. It's sort of, it exists in its own little world. So the combination of all of that meant that I saved up money and I got myself a little 8mm camera, and I started to make, using these same pals, used to make little 4-minute films. And I run them in my personal cinema, which other people insisted in calling my bedroom. And I would run these 4-minute things every sort of second weekend. The weekend in the middle was for shooting. And the significant part of that was that I charged money to get in. And I didn't realize at the time that there was a producer trying to get out, because what I thought I was a director, and I was trying to pursue that golden path. And I finally, at the age of 24, I made a film where I was totally in control as a director, and everybody was very kind. But I knew that I was looking at something that was telling me something important, which is that I was mediocre as a director. So for a while, a year or so, I struggled with should I do something else, you know? And I began to work out why I was so poor as a director was because I'm very aware of system. I'm very aware of there's this and there's that, and if you want to do this, you do this. And that my strategic gifts, if you like, were actually perversely making me not a very good director. And so I decided quite consciously at that point that my job was to produce people whose talent far outweighed mine. And I've followed that principle all my life, which is, it's not my ego that matters. It's enabling something to happen that might not have otherwise happened, or might not have otherwise happened as well as it should. And that has served me in good stead. I mean, Mad Max, for instance, the reason I got involved in that is George Miller called up. I mean, you don't get a call from George Miller every day. And asked me if I would have a look at the production plans for this film. Now, somehow he'd heard about me. That's pretty amazing, you know, for an Australian film director of his importance to have worked out where in the world he can find somebody that can help him to get his film made. And I said to him, well, look, why don't you send me all the stuff that you've got? Email it over to me and I'll have a look at it. He said, no, we don't email anything anywhere. He said, you've got to come to Sydney. So I said, okay, well, I can come for a couple of weeks. And I ended up staying basically in that world for almost 2 years. And finally getting the film made the way he wanted to make it. But even so, and I was telling Gisli, you know, he was very, very suspicious. So my first job was to come into his orbit and to understand him and to appreciate and respect him and understand what it was that he was trying to reach for. In other words, don't behave like an accountant. And he'd hoped that that was what I would be doing, and that was what I hoped I would do. And so we circled around for quite a bit, and he began to realize that I was the least worst option. He didn't want Warner Brothers to know what he was doing, so that was a problem. Warner Brothers wanting me to tell them everything that was going on. And so I was in a situation of a kind of go-between where I was half trusted by Warner Brothers and half trusted by George, and that was how we got the movie made. And we did a pretty good job, actually. And Warner Brothers, it's the third highest Oscar-winning movie in Warner Brothers history. Gravity was the second highest, and My Fair Lady was the number one.
So talk us a little bit about the months or the years after graduation from the school. I mean, surely you're not jumping straight into bed with Warner Brothers or,
No.
or 21st Century Fox and all of that. But
No.
I mean, and again, because many of our students, of course, are facing that, shall we call it, uncertain times and fear, of course. What happens next? Because you go from that protected environment, an exciting environment where you get to engage with film on daily basis, but all of a sudden after school, what happens then? What happens after school?
Well, if you think it's tough now, it was tougher then, for sure. And I'm not remembering that erroneously. It was very, very difficult. You had union problems here. There was all sorts of difficulties. There was a very embedded establishment. So to break in was a tough call. For me, I knew that I wanted to be in this business on almost any terms. And so I managed my expectations by basically being ready to do anything, but just to survive and to keep going. While I was here, I met many incredible students from all over the world, but there was one who had a Scottish accent. And being a wee Scottish boy myself, I wanted to know more about this person. And that was Bill Douglas. And Bill had had the opposite experience to me of growing up in Scotland. For me, growing up in Scotland was a privilege. I was very happy. I was free. I really enjoyed my growing up. For Bill, it was an absolute traumatic nightmare. He grew up gay in a mining village in East Lothian, and he needed to expiate that pain, and that would be the only reason that he would return to Scotland, was to do that and never to return after that. And he and I made a film, a project in the school, as a school project, shot down in Southend Pier, and the fog came in. We could hardly see a foot in front of us. It was terrible. But we still shot the film, and it was kind of interesting. And then we went on. He then said to me, like, I need to make this film my childhood. And so I gleefully said, yep, no problem, I can fix it. You know, we're going to do it. And it was a huge baptism of fire. It was an absolute nightmare. Bill was monstrous. He was so difficult, very, very hard to button down or organize or to support even. But in a funny old way, we made a film which I think is one of the truest films that Scotland has ever produced. And God rest his soul. He was a very troubled and tormented man. But I think he got what he needed from this school.
And the legacy of all his collection actually is in the museum at Exeter, isn't it?
Yeah.
Bill Douglas Museum.
Yeah.
That our students actually, MA-IFB students, they work from that catalogue of.
But he was a very different being. He was a man who could do nothing but be tormented by the business of making films. He was, I mean, in some ways he's very similar on a different level altogether with Alfonso Cuarón, you know, because Alfonso is entirely like that. He doesn't make a film as something he does between the hour of this and the hour of that. He lives it and expects everyone else to live it with him. And so this was part of my kind of, in terms of what do you do, I wanted to help those people. And I wanted to survive, but I wanted to make their life better and help them achieve something that they might not otherwise achieve. And that took a long time. I mean, the 10 years after film school, I worked on, I think probably close to 70 to 80 short films, sponsored films, commercials. I did everything that allowed me to make every mistake in the book. But it didn't really matter too much because it was only £3,000 and you were making a film about sunsets, you know. But I believed I was in the movie business, even though I kind of wasn't. Then one day I was listening to the radio and I heard on BBC Scotland, I heard a French filmmaker called Bertrand Tavernier talking. He'd visited Glasgow and it's an amazing city, you know, and I loved Glasgow, you know. I'm listening to this, that's good, you know. And he said, I want to bring my next movie to Glasgow. So I immediately wrote a letter to Bertrand Tavernier, care of BBC Scotland, Queen Margaret Drive, Glasgow. Dear Mr. Tavernier, I am your man. When you come to Glasgow, I can fix the whole thing. I can do everything, anywhere, anything you want, you know. And I wrote this letter and I sent it off to the BBC. Heard nothing. 6 months later, I'm in a bar with my friends, and then one of them says, "What happened to that letter that you wrote to, you know?" "Oh, I haven't heard anything." Tell you what, that night I wrote another one. Same, exactly the same, through the BBC. I did that for every 6 months for 3 years. I don't know why I did that, but I did it. Some instinct was saying to me, just keep on at that one, because you saw something there. And suddenly the phone rang. There were no mobiles. It was a landline. I happened to be next to it, and I picked it up. And an American voice said, "My name is Robert Parrish. I'm in Heathrow Airport with Mr. Bertrand Tavernier. We're just about to board a flight to Glasgow. Would you be able to meet us at the airport at Abbott's Inch?" Absolutely, no problem at all. I'm your man, you know. Boom. So I went down and put petrol in the Ford Escort, got into the driving seat, and incidentally, I remember this driving seat, if you lean back too suddenly, you went flat, you know. Just and I went and met these two guys off the flight and took them around Glasgow for 3 days, and I showed them everything. They didn't ask for particular things. I just showed them back alleys, stairways, you know, churches, all sorts of things. I just showed them everything and anything. And I finally took them back to the airport, and Bertrand said, "I want to make the movie here and with you." I went, "That's great, you know."
Good choice.
And that's what happened. And we made the film, Death Watch, it's in English, La Mort en Direct, with Romy Schneider, Harvey Keitel, Harry Dean Stanton. That was the first time I was actually able to come into, I production managed it, so I was able to come into a responsibility for a feature film, proper. And that started a different curvature to what I was doing. And after that, I was working with Bill Forsyth, developing scripts, which were getting nowhere. And then I got a call from David Putnam. He said, "Would I look after Chariots of Fire?" And I thought about it for 2.5 seconds and went, "Yes, please." And when I went off to Chariots of Fire, Bill was a bit resentful, I think, because he's, "Well, you know, what about the script we've been developing?" I said, "Oh, you'll be fine, you know, you'll be fine." I kind of abandoned him. And the script, which we developed as a thing called Singles, he made into a film called Gregory's Girl, which did very well. And so Bill was rising up. I was coming off Chariots of Fire, which was a success in every way. And Putnam saw the two of us and said, "Right, stick these two together and make a film about the oil industry in Scotland." And that became Local Hero. And on the back of Local Hero, and this is quite a span of time, by the way. It doesn't all happen in a rush. On the back of Local Hero, David invited me into his office and introduced me to a gentleman that he described as, "This is your biggest problem in life." And that was Roland Cioffi. And the script that he handed me was the script for Killing Fields. And once I'd come through the Killing Fields process, then I was on a different level altogether, because I was registered in Hollywood as somebody who could survive making a movie of that complexity in a third world country and come out on the right side of the budget line. So as soon as you reach that kind of perspective, then life does become more interesting. I hesitate to say it becomes easier, because it doesn't become easier. And if any of you think that you've chosen something that could be easy, forget it. I mean, I've got a lot of movies, as you see, in my knapsack, but it's still very, very difficult. And if you can get your head around the idea that surviving is more important than being a huge international success, then you'll do well. But surviving is absolutely what it's all about.
Iain, just on the back of that last question, I just wanted to ask, at what point would you say, I think you said the killing fields, but was that the point where you thought you mastered your craft, or is it still today, do you still think you're learning a lot of new tricks and skills?
I'm still mastering the craft. Because the nature of the business is that every project is a completely new thing. You know, obviously there's a lot of stuff that you learn how to deal with. You learn how to put a team together. You learn how to lead a team, and you learn a lot of stuff to do with taking. We're all in the storytelling business, and you must never forget why you're making the film. When you start out, you tend to be fascinated by the how of making films. And in fact, the really interesting point is when you get to the why. Why are we making that? Because that's when you can make difficult choices in the middle of the chaos of production. You can work out which way to go. What is the most important scene? You see what I mean? So you stop. What was happening to me at that point was I was going from being production management to being line producing and producing, and where the responsibility on you is quite different. Is that you have a duty to your filmmaker, your director, to help them to get through.
I mean, as a producer, because you are, the top and you are the one to hold everything together. But who would you say is your best friend or someone that you can rely on when you're on a production as well if things get tough? Do you have that?
Well, I will always have the people around me that I need to survive. Production accountant. I need somebody who is certainly able to master the numbers and in a creative way. I don't mean that in creative accountancy way. A very strong UPM and a very strong first assistant. And obviously when you're putting a team together, I always try and surround myself by people who are better than me. And that's the key to leadership. Is that if you're going to lead people, you have to be a servant to those people. And that if you can do that with people and give them the authority that will balance the responsibility you're asking them to carry, then it's unbelievable what happens. How people step right up, if they're good. I mean, unfortunately, not everybody is good. And so there has to be a gimlet eye for the ones that are not carrying their weight. So, I mean, this is the whole discussion in itself, is how you lead. It's a bit military in that sense. How do you lead your team to victory? And what is the mission that you're trying to achieve? And so with something like The Killing Fields, it's a big movie, a big war movie in Cambodia.
Shot on location there.
Yeah.
Shot on location.
Yeah, we shot it all in pretty much. We couldn't go into Cambodia because the Khmer Rouge were still in power. But we shot very close to the borders, so there was a lot of Khmer in the film. And our main guy, Hang Nor, was Khmer, and we found him about 13, 14 weeks out from shooting, and we had a Chinese actor from Hong Kong lined up, and we all knew that this was he wasn't right. He was nearly right. And Heng was working for the transport department in Long Beach. And his friends set him up as a joke to come to a casting session. And I actually don't think he really knew that it was a casting session. He just turned up. And I remember Pat Golden, the casting director who went there, a brilliant piece of casting. She sent us a videotape of him, and we sat there and watched this, and we knew he was our death Pran. And frankly, if we hadn't had Hang, the film would have been a dud, for sure. In fact, when I watched the film with an audience, the first 20 minutes are painful for me because we're pushing the story. We're not pulling the story, if you follow what I mean. But when Hang finally says to Sam Waterston, but I'm a reporter too, I'm a journalist too, meaning I will stay in Cambodia when the Khmer Rouge come. You can feel the audience is glomming on straight away. And it's just a wonderful moment. And you feel relief. Oh, thank God, you know. Now they're getting the movie. And that runs right the way through to the end of the movie. And of course, Hang won his Oscar for that movie. I remember when we edited it, not far from here, and we went over to Los Angeles to test it with an audience. And I was in the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, and the phone rang, and I picked up the phone, and there was a little voice saying, "Iain, it's Hang." And I thought, oh, fuck. We've been editing this fucking movie, and nobody has actually spoken to Hang. He's gone back to his job in Long Beach. And here we are in Los Angeles with Warner's getting all excited, and we're going to test it in San Diego, and we're going to fly down from Burbank to San Diego in the corporate jet, you know, all that bullshit. And there's Hang saying, I hear there's a screening of the movie maybe, you know, because I do this kind of, Hang, I was just about to call you.
Of course.
And I said, well, you got to come up, we'll send a car. No car. I said, well, you've got to get to the Beverly Wilshire tomorrow at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And he turned up. That's the hotel where Pretty Woman was set. And he turned up looking like a little lost soul. And I'd remember, I mean, he was so powerful in the film. And here he was, this little forgotten person. And I said, right, you're coming into the limo, provided by Warner Brothers, big fucking stretch limo. We drive all the way over to Burbank. It would have been quicker to drive to San Diego, but no. We drive to Burbank, and all the top brass are there getting into the plane, and Hang sees the jet, sees all these people, and he said, no, not possible. I can't do this. And I said, come on, get on the plane. I squeezed him in. He ran all the way down to the back of the plane, down by the bags and stuff. And we took off and flew, landed. A fleet of limousines took us to the cinema, and the movie played. And at the end of it, there was stunned silence from the audience, complete silence, which in America is not good. Americans generally like to express themselves to the cinema. Britain, silence is okay, but in America it's deadly. So we all trooped out into the lobby, and we're standing in a worry huddle, you know. Well, what do you think? I mean, I think it's okay. I mean, I think they were really moved, you know. I think it's bad news. I think we've got a bummer here, you know, and this kind of stuff going on. And meanwhile, the audience were still in the auditorium filling out their cards. And then suddenly the doors to the auditorium opened, and we turned around and we looked, and the audience was coming out backwards. I remember this, and will remember this as long as I live. Backwards. What the fuck is that? And then we realized that in the middle of them was Hang Noor, signing autographs. Because somebody in the audience had noticed him sitting quietly at the back of the cinema, and they all flocked to him. And so he was signing autographs. And when we got back on the plane to get back up to Burbank, he was up front with Terry Semel and Bob Daly and all the big shots, you know, and I was down at the back with the baggage. And he won his Oscar, and then a few years later he was murdered by Cambodian street kids in Long Beach. He got out of his car. He had a couple of yards to go to the back of his little wooden house, and they they went for him and popped him, and he died right there on the steps of his own little house.
How do you see your role as a producer?
And it's very moving, because you think what he came through. He went through the whole Khmer Rouge. That's why his performance is so strong. He survived it.
Sort of not overstep.
And he was reliving it.
To the director sphere, and how do you?
I'm sorry, I've rather gone on about that, but these are all part of the process of learning about what really matters when you make a film.
How do you see your role as a producer in regards to sort of the creative process? Because it seems like you very much care about the films that you produce, but how do you sort of not overstep the boundary and sort of get into the director sphere, and how do you do that relationship?
Did you hear that question? It's a very important question, and I'll try to give a very important answer. My role as a producer is to serve creativity. I'm actually not interested in money. I need money, and I get very well paid when I manage to get a movie going. But in truth, I need enough money to make me forget money, so that I can concentrate on working with the creative filmmaker. People have accused me of being soft on creatives, which I strenuously reject, because I firmly believe that the more organized you are in your prep, and the more you've gone through the sometimes adversarial business of trying to understand what it is you're about to do, the more organized you are, the more flexible you can be. Because what you take, if you imagine 100% of the making of a film, the activity, probably 75 to 80% of that can be routinized. It can be set up so that you don't have to worry about it, it's running. Then you're able to look at the 20, 25, 30%, where there is the possibility of change and the possibility of discovery. And that is a process of protecting the filmmaker, but it's also a process of containing the filmmaker. Because what you don't want is the studio coming off planes and starting to bully their way around the set. You want to keep them well out. Now with George Miller, George, as I've already said, he made that a thing of his right at the very beginning. And he didn't have a script for Mad Max. We had storyboards. I think he never agreed with this, but my theory was that he knew that if he had a script, it meant that executives in Burbank could have an opinion. And so he wanted to, and I'm not, by the way, recommending this to you. I think script is very important and story is even more important. But this was how he came to the work. He had a very suspicious demeanor towards the studio. He just wanted their money and their releasing power, and that's it. And he needed to know that, coming back to your question, that I was prepared to run as fast as he could, creatively. And so I made it my business to really, really understand that movie before we'd got into the spending of big money. And to, I remember sitting walking around this huge room in the cinema his headquarters are in Sydney, and we had 4,500 storyboards up, and literally going through, looking at all of these things, and trying to understand how does that connect to that, and where is the storyline in this, you know, finding all of that stuff. And at that point, I remember thinking, what the hell have I done here? This is really, really difficult. In fact, if I'm honest, it's impossible. But again, a piece of advice is that when you come to meet the impossible, rejoice, because that's where you should be. You should be right at the membrane with the impossible, because something happens. This is going to get a bit metaphysical, but something happens when you put yourself almost insanely at risk, and you're doing something against the better judgment of so many other people. Something happens to help you. I'm not religious, but I have to say, I can tell you quite a few occasions where if we weren't at that point, we would not have been rewarded by what they would call good luck. And it's almost as if there's some force in nature that gives you that extra little bit of something because you deserve it. And that was very much the case with Fury Road. Definitely the case with Killing Fields. And several films had that point. City of Joy, which we made in Calcutta. I remember looking out the window of the hotel at the January in Calcutta, full of charcoal clouds. It's an amazing city, dark city, dark place. And thinking, what on earth have I done? How did I get here? Yes, you know. Glasgow suddenly looked like Beverly Hills, you know. And City of Joy was the most difficult production I've ever worked on. We were under attack from the writers' building, the local government, Marxist-Leninist zealots. Bombs were thrown at us. We had riots on a regular basis to deal with. Roland, Cioffi and I had death threats. And, I mean, everyone who worked on that film now sees themselves as part of a privileged club because we survived the making of that film. It wasn't a great film, but it's in many ways quite a beautiful film. So coming back to your thing, my only reason for existing is creativity. And I'm trying to bring my own relatively limited creativity to the aid of a greater power. Alfonso Cuarón, I think, is an absolute master, but he's a pain in the ass to work with. And he doesn't settle for second best. He's an absolute perfectionist, you know, and such a difficult man to work with. Day in, day out, we were nose to nose, and I would be delighted if I could ever find the opportunity to work with him again. Because even the crew, who were all on one level, hated him for the way he behaved. Nobody left, nobody packed it in, because they knew that they were in the grip of somebody who was taking us all to a place that we could never reach on our own. So that's kind of a little bit of an answer, isn't it? Okay, good.
Well, on that note, just before I give a question of that, so how do you manage the egos? Because very often, I mean, as students go through film school, it is the management of relationships, indeed. It's very challenging, the collaborative effort, if anything. That's the hardest bit about learning how to make films and actually make films. So how do you manage the big egos without actually damaging the personal relationships?
Well, I'll tell you a quick story. The very first project that we did at this school, and I have a smile every time I drive through Hampstead. There's a little traffic island in Hampstead with 2 telephone boxes on it. I think they're still there. And I always smile because the team of students that we were went up to shoot this scene that we'd written about these 2 telephone boxes. And we ended up punching each other in the middle of this traffic island in Hampstead, kind of arguing and screaming at each other, you know. And of course, that was the whole purpose of the project. It wasn't going to be geniuses. It was to actually learn how you actually can sort yourselves out. But when you get to ego, everyone has an ego, and it's good to have ego. You can't achieve anything if you don't have an ego. But some have more ego than others. And where I come from, I think of it as a form of insecurity. That when you're dealing with the big stars, they are, well, the biggest ones are very secure, funnily enough, because they kind of get it. They know what they do, and I mean, Connery, for instance, Sean knew exactly what he is. And he'll be an Edinburgh Russian submarine commander, you know.
Yeah, how he got away with that, being a Russian submarine commander and speaking with a heavy Scottish accent,
you know. and he knows what he is, you see. So he's worked out. So he's actually great to work with because he's definitely got ego, but he's got it all buttoned down and he knows what he's doing. The layer below that, who I think I should probably not name anyone, but they are much more dangerous in terms of the day-to-day working, because they feel they should be the A-list stars and they're A- or B+. And so they're the ones who insist on the pop-out Winnebagos and having an entourage and all this bullshit, you know. I mean, I remember on Entrapment, there was one of the other actors, I'm trying not to mention him, who let it be known among the crew that he didn't want anyone to look at him in the eye. You know, have you heard that one? Don't look at me in the eye, okay? American. And Sean got to hear about this. Not from me or from anyone, you know, but from like one of the chippies, something like that. Said, "Yeah, he's not letting us look at him in the eyes, you know." And Sean, really? So the next morning he walked on the set and he walked straight up to this actor and said, "I've heard that you've asked everyone not to look at you in the eye. That's just bullshit, isn't it?" You know? And that was the end of that. And it all proceeded quite happily. But I find I have to do a lot of absorbing of negative energy. And you have to become, you kind of, you know, if someone yells at you, you want to yell back. You have to try and deal with that energy, because you've got to get through to them that you're there to help them. You're not attacking. You're not going to hurt them. That you're there to crew egos can be, strange enough, even more difficult, because people feel they've got their position and they want to be somehow or other treated differently. I mean, a lot of camera people are a bit like that, to generalize terribly. But they come in rather late in the process often, and they find everything is sort of set up and running, and that they haven't somehow managed to piss on it so it smells like them. So they start to piss on it and find fault. And sometimes, you know, you've got to deal with that. Each one of those situations is unique. You have to look at the individual, work out what's actually happening here. Why is this guy feeling this way? And some solutions are to give a hug, and the other is to really give them a roasting. But you don't do that in front of anyone. You do it just one-on-one, and you just say you've got a choice. If you want to be out of here tonight, I will personally drive you to the airport, because you don't seem to be happy on this movie. And we cannot afford to have unhappy people in the movie. And 99% of the time works a treat. But it's a scary moment. I mean, I remember on the mission with Robert De Niro, Putnam did a brilliant move on him, which De Niro felt that he wanted to actually control how the film was going to be shot and made, and Roland, our director, was having some trouble. And David got us all round for dinner, and we were sitting around talking away about this and about that, and De Niro piped up and says, "I don't like this scene. I think this scene's not going to work, you know." And we all kind of went, and David did a wonderful David thing. He was saying, "Well, Bobby, funnily enough, I've got in my pocket," and he pulled out a piece of paper. He said, "And I've written down all the box office takings for your last 5 films." And we're sitting there almost with our knives and forks going, "What the fuck," you know? And he says, "And if you added up all these box offices for your last 5 films, it wouldn't be enough to justify this film." And it was exactly that. Completely stunned silence. And De Niro just looked at him, you know, and then he just shut up, and we started talking. And from that point on, law had been established. And it's a great lesson for me. I learned a lot from Putnam. He taught me a great deal. And I owe him a huge debt for that. So, I mean, it's an ego, you have to have it. I don't think if it's out of control, it's very dangerous and will definitely damage the film. If it's controlled, it's like nuclear fission, you know. It can be put to peaceful purposes.
So I'm wondering how do I get my production plan to you? How does that happen?
Go through my agent. No, and what do you mean production plans?
For the next project, for the next film.
Well, but why would you want to approach me?
Because I would hope it would be a project you'd be interested in.
Possibly. I get about 3 or 4 a week. And don't say this to spit in your face, by the way, but just to explain. And I still try to give them a fair shot, which is asking a lot, actually. Because if it's a fully developed screenplay, that's a day. It's a day, because what I do is I'll do a sort of intuit read right through, a skim read almost. And then I tend to go back through it, and occasionally I'll pick something up and I'll know within a couple of pages that this is not going to work, you know. I think I'm trying to think how best to answer your question. I think I'm more interested in ideas than in finished projects. Because the development process, even if it's not something that belongs to me, if it's not initiated by me, I go through a kind of development process inside me, which is to learn and understand and to question why. Why did they put the scene where he looks out the window there? You know, it doesn't make sense, you know. And also what I do with scripts is I look at them from the point of view of what I call the traffic lights. So the green, and I actually do mark them. Green are the scenes without which you don't have a story. Red are the scenes that really, they don't do much carrying for the story. And amber is the ones that kind of, if you were really in trouble, you could maybe do without. And in order to make that choice, you have to really, really understand the material. So it's a big, big commitment. And also, I'm getting to the point now where I've got to stop thinking about the future as an ever-ending fun bag, you know. I've got to face the fact that I'm now in my 70s, and the world is changing fast, and what do I know? You know, my feet are still very much in the what I think was the last of the golden age of filmmaking. And I think it's a rougher, tougher, more exciting world in many ways. I think the Netflix generations are going to be faced with a whole set of different issues. So this is all a sort of slightly pathetic way of saying, unless it's really something special, I'm probably not interested. Is that fair?
That's fair. That's totally fair.
Can you pass the microphone just in front of you there, please?
So on the line of like speaking about egos, I have a question from like coming as, because we're students right now, we at least the filmmaking students, most of us come into school hoping that one day we're going to be able to be successful directors. And you went through the process where you felt like you had to switch your reality and almost change the fact that maybe I'm not good enough to be able to do this. When there's a constant battle between my next film might just be better and maybe this is not good for me, how do you deal with that dilemma in deciding, you know, to go forward what you want to do, but, you know?
Well, I think the first thing you have to do, whatever it is you choose to aim for, is to bravely understand yourself. Because you are the filter through which everything travels. And that's very hard because, as I said, when I was 24, I went through this and it was almost kind of suicidal. I mean, I'm not a suicidal type, but I just thought this game's up. You know, this is, I'm fucked, you know, I can't. Because I saw the truth. Now, having said that, there hasn't a year gone by since when I haven't wondered, maybe I did that too quickly. But I don't think I did. So I think whatever you want to aim for, you need first of all to deal with yourself. Because if you can deal with yourself and understand where you mess things up, where you perhaps indulge in a kind of wishful thinking, the whole process is wishful thinking. But if you do it unduly, it's not very good. So it's this combination of, I mean, it's a Taoist thing of balance. If you can be tough on yourself, but also liberate yourself to think things and hope for things, then I think you've got a chance. But you have to know what you have to know. I mean, to be honest, very, very few of you will be great filmmakers. That doesn't mean to say you cannot be part of the film business. You absolutely can. And you can bring your skills and talents to the service of a fantastic business. But really great filmmakers are something special. And it's been my privilege to work with some great filmmakers, and to be in the presence of that is awe-inspiring for me. And so I think when you come to be a student, you're in a very vulnerable place, you guys, because here you are coming out of the egg, you know, looking at the world and going, hey, this is great. And that's all good, nothing wrong with that. But you're also full of nonsense. Because you can't have anything else, it must be nonsense. It must be, you know, it's a wonderful nonsense to have. But you also have to equip yourself with the armory to protect yourself, and part of that is being realistic and not expecting yourself to be an overnight success. I actually don't know of any overnight successes. I'm certainly not one. And it's, you know, I've worked a long, long life for people like you to come and sit and listen to me waffle away. It's because I've kept on standing up. When I fell down on my face, I would get immediately back up. Why? Because I was afraid of giving up. I was afraid of giving up because my mother said to me when I was quite young, you give up too easy. And she made me think about that. And it became a thing in me, you know. I know I'm lazy, and I give up. How do you make films like that when you're lazy and you give up? The answer is you turn the thing in on yourself so that you say, you're a lazy little shit, you know. You're thinking of giving up, you know. No, no, no. And so you have this internal dialogue that keeps you going on regardless of whatever nightmares you're facing. And that's particularly true of directors. Directors are incredibly vulnerable. It's the loneliest job in the world. It really is. And they need to trust people. And when they can trust the producer, then their ability to produce something really wonderful is increased hugely. They don't have to worry about all that stuff. And they know that they're not being undermined or backstabbed, all of that stuff. That's a rather negative way of putting it, but I hope that makes sense. You are your futures. You will do it. You will do it. If you really don't let yourself off the hook. Don't ever let yourself off the hook. Because if you do let yourself off the hook, you'll regret it.
Thank you for being here first. And I have an awkward question, I guess, but it's, what do you consider in filmmaking your biggest failure, and what did you learn from it?
My biggest what?
Failure.
My biggest failures, yeah, I've got a few of those. I made a film called Killing Dad. And we had a fantastic, it's a funny title, it's a comedy, but it was a very unfunny film. And we had a brilliant cast. We had Denham Elliott, Richard E. Grant, you know. We just had Julie Walters, you know, fantastic idea. And as we shot it, I thought, something's wrong. And when we put it together, it was unsalvageable. It was the worst experience. Horrible. And what was the worst part of it was that when you made it, because Lorimar, who financed it, they expect you to turn up at all the premieres, you know, and smile as if you're feeling great about it, when you actually what you want to do is to curl up in a ball and go and hide in a corner. But you have to do this kind of, wow, great, the movies, you know. That was tough. And the other very difficult one was a film called Hearts of Fire, which we had Bob Dylan. And I spent 3 months with Bob Dylan, day in, day out. And in that brief time, we became quite good friends. And I have such a huge regard for him. Very special man, obviously. And I could and won't tell you lots of stories about Bob Dylan. But what happened was Bob Dylan, because we were all concentrating on his role, the other roles, played by Rupert Everett and a girl called Fiona Flanagan, were left to sort of find their own way, really. I mean, that's a pretty cruel assessment. But it ended up with this absolutely embarrassing film. And but I remember going to a party once, and a guy came up to me and said, are you in the film business? I said, yeah, I am. And he said, were you involved in a film, Killing, and I said, Killing Fields? No, Killing Dad. And I thought he was going to punch me. And he said, I loved that film, it was really funny. And I learned a lesson, you know. You can't, even though you've got your hang-ups, and you wear it like a hair coat, you know, you have to say, well, thank you. You know.
My question will be really specific. I mean, you as producer, do you have also the responsibility to choose the film music composer somehow? And if you do it, do you usually use a casting method, or is a choice of the director? Do you give also some opportunities to young composers that probably haven't done such great works? So how you choose music for a movie?
Interesting.
It's a very, very important moment, actually, because the music will often rescue the film. The Mission was a pretty languorous movie until Morricone suddenly produced one of the best scores.
That's his only Oscar, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Was nominated at the Oscar.
It was nominated, yeah.
Yeah,
but
nominated,
he never
but not
got
won.
the Oscar. They had to give him a special Oscar, wasn't it? Yeah.
The Eightful Eight.
Yeah.
Such a shame.
It was absolute scandal.
Well, yeah, but Chariots of Fire, I mean, Vangelis, we hadn't realized that Vangelis' father had just died a couple of months before he got the job of scoring Chariots. And what was fascinating was that his father had run in the 1924 Olympics for Greece. And so Vangelis was writing a tribute to his dead father. And so the music has this incredible mysterious quality, you know. But to answer your question, it depends. I mean, the way I like to work is the filmmaker is making the film, and I'm nipping at the heels. So if I think there's a particular composer or anyone, I mean, a designer or a costume designer or whatever, editor, that for a particular reason would be good for this filmmaker, then I will very carefully place that thought with them. The thing is, you've got to be very careful how it comes back to the ego thing again. You've got to be careful how you bestow that kind of information. I liken it to having a bit of food, you know. The last thing you do is pick the food up and shove it in the other person's mouth, saying, "You'll like this." What you have to do is go, "You know, this is really bloody good," you know, and put it down on the table in front of them and look the other way. and that, so it's a sort of elliptical kind of, it's quite a feminine thing, if that's not too controversial a thing to say. You can't, some filmmakers are very straight up and down. When Darren Aronofsky, absolutely, you can go straight to Darren and say, boom, and he will take it and think about it and come back and say no, or maybe yes. With many others, you have to be very careful, because what you don't want is them to take against a good idea. What you want them to do is to examine it properly. So it's a sort of very odd role, but it's I think an important one, based again on trust. But I mean, composing is it's absolutely the cavalry that saves the movie. I mean, again with Mission, I remember Morricone came over to the cutting rooms in Wardour Street, and he'd asked for a piano in the cutting room, and it went something like this. He said, and we'd run it on the cam, you know, and then he would go, and we were all watching this performance by this genius, you know. Think, what the fuck is this, you know? and he called, of course, he went, "That's fantastic, Ennio. That's fantastic." You know? And off he went back to Italy. And then months later, Asa de Simone, his agent, phoned me up and say, "Mr. Morricone, I have the music sheets to give for the orchestra." And I told him where to send them to. And they arrived at our offices. And I don't read music. But I looked at this and wow.
Looks complicated.
Look at this big box. And I immediately sent it over to the orchestra, and the managing director of the orchestra phoned back immediately. And he said, "How do we take a full page in all the trades for the Cannes Film Festival?" I'm going, "Is the music that good?" I knew, jumping. I said, "Is the music that good?" And he said, "It will be an honor for the orchestra to play this music." and he was doing that from the reading it from the sheets. And I'm still getting goosebumps now. The first time we heard the recording up in Wembley at CTS, and just thinking, oh my God, this is so fantastic. And the choral work, you know. And there's a little voice at the end of the child singing. Do you know the score? You know? And there's that voice of the lonely child crying out in the jungle as the violin sinks in the river. And he searched and searched and searched. And we searched with him for what he wanted was what he described as a brown voice. He didn't want a white voice. He wanted a brown voice who had to be able to sing beautifully and to have that edgy openness, you know. And he found it. Found a little kid who could sing. What a wonderful business this is.
Yeah, exactly.
Isn't it incredible to have those adventures? It was worth coming to the film school.
Well, on that note of magic, I'm sure we can continue for hours and days on end. But thank you all for coming here tonight, and thanks to our special guest, Iain. Thank you so much.
Thank you.